So thank you everyone so much for joining us this morning. My name is Dana Kelly and I have served as the Executive Director of NAGC since 2019. And welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just so excited to have this illustrious author and historian, Urness Gesme, and her family with us here today. She is a longtime friend of NAGC, and I just feel so privileged to welcome her here today with all of us. And as these registrations were pouring in, one of the things that we noticed was that there are a lot of you who we haven't seen before, and maybe you're not familiar with what NAGC is. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction of what we are. We are the Norwegian American Genealogical Center and Naiseth Library, and we are the most comprehensive center dedicated exclusively to Norwegian genealogy. In 2020, we undertook some pretty extensive renovations to add an elevator to the building, as well as improve our lighting and other additions that make the building ADA compliant and a little more accessible to everyone. So I hope that you will take the time to visit us when you're in Madison the next time and just see how we have changed and grown over the past couple of years. And if you're ready to dig back into your genealogy research in person after these pandemic closures the past year or so, we are open. And we just, if you ask that if you need to work with a researcher one-on-one, that you schedule an appointment before you stop in. We offer a variety of services to our members. We have classes for genealogy. We will translate documents from Norwegian for you if you have letters or diaries and things like that. We have translators who can do that for you. We offer help with your genealogy if you just want someone to do it for you. We have researchers on staff who will do that. If you've taken one of those DNA tests and you need some help sorting through your results, I'd be happy to sit down with you and kind of analyze what those things might mean. We also do outreach. If you're looking for a speaker for your Sons of Norway Lodge or family reunion, genealogy society, anything like that, just let us know. We can come up with something for your group. While we were closed for that darn pandemic, we decided it was a good time to update our research guide. So the 7th edition of our research guide is available directly from our website or from Amazon. And we've added quite a bit of information to it since the last update a few years ago. So if you have our old edition, you may want to think about getting this one because it does have a lot more in it. And of course, we have the updated Between Rocks and Hard Places available on our website. And we do have some autographed copies left that were signed by the author. And those are available on a first come, first served basis. So I can't promise that they'll still be available in a week, but we do have some as of this moment. We have our Christmas cards available. They're going fast though. It was done by a local artist, Katie Maurer of Colored Soul Studios from the Madison area, and she just loves those puffins, and I do too. I think they are adorable. And we do also have greeting cards that were based on designs by Olive Nordby. She was an artist and longtime supporter of NAGC as well. And so we revived a couple of her more popular designs as blank greeting cards for the holiday season coming up here. And here is the commercial part of it. We are a membership organization, and there are some great reasons to become a member. One of them, I think, is that you're supporting a great organization. Maybe I'm a little biased in my opinion there, but we do also offer a newsletter a couple times a year. We have discounts on all of our services and merchandise for our members. And at some membership levels, you have access to all of our online genealogical databases that are on our website. Coincidentally, we received this brooch as a donation this summer from one of our members. And when I saw it, I thought, this would be perfect for the Rocks and Hard Places audience, because this brooch was inspired by those iconic designs that are on the outside of the Urness stavkirke, which of course is featured rather prominently in Rocks and Hard Places. So this is available for auction until tomorrow afternoon from the site that you see here. And I know Diane has sent a few messages out about that as well. So, I mean, On to the lady of the hour here. We are just so fortunate to have Ann Gesme here with us today to share this talk with us. She is a longtime supporter of NAGC, and she was on our board of directors actually several years ago. So when this book was first re-released, I contacted one of her daughters and I said, gosh, do you think your mom would do a talk to our members? And I was just so thrilled when she agreed. So thank you, Gesme family, for being here today and giving up a Saturday morning. And so now I would like to just turn those three loose.
Well, thank you so much, Dana. We're just thrilled to be here. And thank you, everybody, for being patient with our electronic challenges. And that's only an example of what we have been through for the last couple of years as we as a family tried to connect on Zoom and on conference calls. And the result is this presentation and this new book, Norwegian Emigration Between Rocks and Hard Places. So I am Karen Gesme Brunson, and I'm the middle child of Ann Urness Gesme's three children. Ann, we'll be calling her mom. She's sitting right next to me right here. I've been staying with her for a couple days here. My sister Martha and my brother Dean Jr. and we're all excited to share our very unique experience as a family that resulted in our new book, Norwegian Emigration Between Rocks and Hard Places. And we are honored to have been invited by the Norwegian American Genealogical Center and NASEF Library, and very thankful to Dana Kelly, Executive Director of the Genealogy Center, who has been so genuinely enthused about Mom's new book, which we're calling our new book now, and doing this webinar today. So for many years, Mom, Ann Urness Gesme, did presentations based on her research, but this is her first webinar. Whether you are an experienced genealogist or a novice, or somebody interested in your ancestors or planning a trip to Norway, or reflecting on a trip you've experienced or just plain curious, this book brings to life more of the stories and information about rural Norwegians who decided to emigrate to the United States. This is the front of the book on the left and the back of the book on the right. You will hear from all of us during the webinar as we take you through a little history of how it all started and give you a preview of the book's content. We hope all of you will purchase copies of the book, and if you do purchase them through the Genealogy Center website or go to the center in Madison, NAGC benefits. And just a heads up, we will show this slide again at the end, and you may write down that web address now if you want to. You could take a picture of this with your phone or a screenshot, but we'll have that address and all this information for you once again at the end. So I want to introduce my family. You can see in this picture, Mom and Dad and us three kids. And you can see our dad, Dean Hartley Sr., is in the right-hand corner on the lower right. He was a management consultant for doctors and dentists and a huge support of all Mom's genealogy endeavors. Mom and Dad celebrated 70 years of marriage, July 22nd, 2020. Dad passed away in October of 2020. And then quite beautifully on July 22nd, what would have been their 71st wedding anniversary, we launched this book. And we're really excited about it. It is dedicated to Dad's memory. All of us kids have worked with Mom over the past couple years to facilitate publication of Norwegian Emigration Between Rocks and Hard Places. We brought our individual areas of expertise, transferable skills, perspective, and interest to our many conversations. So let's start by meeting Martha. She's on the top left, and she's my young sister.
Hi, everybody. My husband, Peter, and I have one daughter, Emma. She's an athletic trainer and is engaged to be married next September. Last year, I retired after 37 years with Scandinavian Airlines, where I was a global sales manager. Besides helping edit the book, I served as our main distribution coordinator.
Next, let's meet my big brother, Butch. His formal name is Dean Gesme Jr. Go ahead, Butch. Oh, are you muted, Butch? Well, just in case he's not there, I'll talk about Butch. Butch is married to Laura, and they have 3 daughters and 2 sons-in-law and 5 grandchildren. And he was a medical oncologist and retired from his role as president and managing partner of Minnesota Oncology. He's done a lot of writing himself, and he has a great acumen for business. And so he's come in incredibly handy when we needed to do editing. He introduced us to Grammarly, and he has a very dry sense of humor. So that went a long way in our discussions. And he has had lots of business advice. And
Thanks,
then
Karen. I
There's
just got in.
Okay, so Butch, we just talked about you. You want to say anything else about yourself?
No, hopefully you didn't say anything too terrible.
I didn't tell everything. His poetic sense is very dry, but very fun. So I'm Karen, and I'm the one in the upper right, and I'm the middle child. And so my name is now Karen Gesme Brunson. My husband is Kim. He was a high school choral director, and I have 1 son, Carl, who's 39. I've had a solo singing career, classical singing with symphonies around the world, around the country, and with many ensembles in Chicago. And currently I'm a professor at Northwestern University Beaton School of Music, and I'm co-chair of music performance. In 2018, I wrote a book called The Evolving Singing Voice Changes Across the Lifespan, and it was published by Plural Publishing, where I'm also a consulting editor for the publishing company. I've gotten to do some nice things having to do with this book, with editing and especially with pictures. And I really enjoyed going to the NAGC dinner in October and talking about Mom's book and this webinar. I enjoyed helping to choose photos and illustrations, in particular, working with Vesterheim and the Norska Folka Museum from their archives. So now I invite you to just sit back, relax, and enjoy our story, similar to what we enjoyed Mom telling us so many stories as we grew up. And rather than taking this all in as if it's facts and figures that we don't want to forget, you can buy the book, it's all in there, but now just enjoy this. Mom?
Pleasure to be with all of you today. Thank you to the Genealogy Center for hosting this webinar. A little background for myself. I grew up on a dairy farm in Vermont Township, which is in Dane County in southern Wisconsin, next door to the Vermont Lutheran Church. The location in Wisconsin is highlighted in the little map on the right, and that's also where the Genealogy Center is in that county. I grew up among Norwegians. All of my relatives were of Norwegian descent, as were most of our neighbors and friends. My grandpa Urness died before I was born, but grandma lived with us, and my maternal grandparents just 2 miles down the road. So from day one, I was very aware of my Norwegian heritage.
And I'm just going to intersperse here now. Mom is now 93 years old, and she's still an active and respected genealogist. In addition to her Rocks and Hard Places and now Norwegian Emigration book, she also published 4 family history books. And now we continue with Mom.
Okay. Here you see the Vermont Lutheran Cemetery. My earliest exposure to genealogical data was when Grandma Urness took me with her to tend the graves of loved ones at this cemetery just up the hill from my family farm, 3 miles south of Black Earth in Wisconsin. She would read the inscriptions on the tombstones and tell me stories about the people buried there. Today, this is the final resting place of my husband, my siblings, both parents, 4 grandparents, all 8 great-grandparents, and even 3 great-great-grandparents, along with many aunts, uncles, cousins, a niece, and many others dear to me. And here you see the monument that was on the farm, which was the burial place of the early Norwegian immigrants in Vermont Township. It's located on the hillside of our family farm. And one of the names engraved on this monument is Lars Monson. He's my great-grandma Urness's uncle. So of course he was my relative too. And when my relatives decided to come to America, he was their link to America. So it was to this place they came when they emigrated in 1857. He'd been in Wisconsin since the 1840s. And then the Urness family bought the farm, and it remains in the family to this day. Now, in the attic of our farmhouse, there were 3 immigrant trunks bearing silent testimony to the immigrant journey of my great-grandparents. Johannes and Martha Urness came to America with their little girl, Anna. Now, these trunks carried all of their worldly goods to Wisconsin. The immigrants were required to provide their own bedding, as well as non-perishable foods, such as dried or salted meat, cheese, flatbread, flour, and whatever they needed, enough to last for 8 weeks, along with the utensils for cooking, making coffee, carrying water, and for eating. Sort of like a picnic lasting 2 months, where you bring your own table service. Now, when Dean and I, both of Norwegian descent, got married, we didn't have time or the money for a honeymoon. So we agreed that we would visit Norway for our 25th wedding anniversary, giving me plenty of time to plan that first trip to the old country. After that first trip in 1975, we returned 9 more times. We visited farms where our Norwegian ancestors lived, met many relatives, distant of course, visited the Norwegian archives. And on our last trip in 1999, when we took our children and grandchildren to Norway to visit their ancestors' homeland. And here, excuse me, here you see the family group who traveled together in Norway. The top right is when we were at Troldhaugen, Greg's home outside of Bergen. And on the lower left, we are in the front of the north facade of the Urness Stav Church.
20 years later, in June of 2019, I duplicated much of that 1999 family trip to Norway by taking all of my kids and grandkids to Norway. They loved the beautiful countryside and especially the little town of Flåm, where we took a high-speed raft tour of the fjord with a local guide who both pointed out historical sites as well as the splendid flora and fauna of the area. The grandkids also enjoyed testing their rudimentary Norwegian language skills, which some of them had learned at the Concordia Norwegian language camp, Skogfjorden.
My first serious writing was based on decades of genealogical research. Here I, excuse me, here I, Karen, do you want to read that?
Sure. So she went to the Bergen archives in 1984, and she would sit there and read church records about Hafslo, and that's where her Urness ancestors and dad's, Dean Gesme Sr.'s ancestors originated. And in this one, this is a really neat picture showing the actual writing of the crest. And so the original handwritten records, they're not easy to read. And on this page, it's from 1787. It shows the marriage, the betrothal record of Mom's great-great-great-grandparents. And it's more than 2 centuries old. At that time, the minister was one of the few people in the parish able to write. Here we go ahead about 200 years from that date, and we can see in 1984, when Mom had purchased her first computer, a K-Pro 2. She had no clue how to go about using it. The complexities of writing text was much more difficult with codes for specific functions like capitalizing and colons. Mom had made up her mind that she was going to figure all of this out. And so without any instruction at all, She gradually learned what buttons to push, and with the help of a few computer-savvy friends, she learned word processing using WordStar, not Word. She quickly became a pro, of course, and completed the text for her first book on that K-Pro 2 in 1985.
To make each page perfect, Mom did not have a copy, cut, and paste or snippet function to help insert pictures into the book. Instead, she used a wooden frame with a plexiglass top that was made by my dad and lit from underneath with a little clip-on light. Mom literally copied the picture on a copy machine, cut it with a scissor to the size allotted on the page, taped it onto graph paper to make sure it was straight with the text, and then pasted it down. The kitchen counter was her workspace for every picture in that original book.
Norwegian heritage before I went to St. Olaf College, but it was an assignment there to write my family saga for Norwegian 101 that began a lifetime of research and writing. When searching for a title, I hearkened back to my Norwegian history teacher, Karen Larson, and her first lecture at St. Olaf College in the fall of 1945, which was from Isaiah 51:1 of the King James Version, and it said, "Look to the rock from whence ye are hewn, and to the hole of the pit whence ye are digged." This provided the title for my series of family episodes, Look to the Rock. In addition to collecting vital statistics and gathering information from church records, I visited libraries and cemeteries, collected maps, gathered any information available. Finally, with all of these genealogical treasures gathered, I began writing the story of our ancestors. After seeing my first 3 family history books, a Norwegian professor friend suggested that I glean the generic material and write an all-purpose book for general distribution. So I did, and the first Between Rocks and Hard Places edition was born. My original intent was to print a few hundred copies of the book for genealogists to better understand conditions their Norwegian immigrant ancestors faced. I suggested to my husband that he have about 300 copies printed, but he felt there would be a bigger market than that and ordered 3,000. Well, he proved correct. The book sold well. Several additional printings were published over the course of the next couple of decades, but I got tired of doing this from the kitchen counter. And so finally, we turned it over to someone else to take care of the printing and the distribution. That gave me time in 2005 to write the last of my 4 Look to the Rock family history books. The first family history book I completed was the Gesme episode about my husband's paternal side in 1985. 3 years later, I did my paternal side, the Urness episode. And in 1991, I did my maternal side, the Dibdal Anderson episode. And finally, then in 2005, the Tolly episode appeared.
Mom's original computer, her precious K-Pro 2, and its difficult word processing system was soon replaced by computers with better word processing software. In 1992, Mom's technology got a facelift, including a laser printer and an improved monitor. Of course, they pale in comparison to what we have access to now, but it was certainly a nice improvement. The shadow backs from a couple of slides back, which I still have and use for craft projects, and the graph paper cut and paste method continued to serve her well in preparing the manuscript for the first edition of Between Rocks and Hard Places, which was published in 1993, and her Look to the Rock family history series.
This is a photo of Mom's personal Norwegian historical reference library. In this collection, she is proud to have a copy of Gerhard Naismith's 5-volume Norwegian Immigrants to the United States, as well as numerous Norwegian American Historical Association publications, including the Studies and Records, Ylvestad's Nordman in America, and many Bygdebøker.
Mom has continued to write short papers and do PowerPoint presentations over many years. These writings are saved on her computer and in 3-ring binders as hard copies. This was an incredible resource for Norwegian immigration between rocks and hard places. Time and time again, we would mention a topic that might make sense to include, and she would say, "Oh, I wrote a life stories about that. Let me find that." As a family, we have priceless accountings of our favorite recipes that have been passed down through the generations in Just Like Mother Used to Make. Stories about Mom's upbringing, of our life as a family, Christmases over the years, and of our ancestors. We have 4 books about our family roots and Norwegian immigration between rocks and hard places. Dad was even inspired to write down some of his childhood memories. Now let's talk about how we went about writing our new book.
When we realized a few years ago that Mom's earlier book was both out of print and largely unavailable to interested parties, we persuaded Mom to author a new and expanded edition containing many new photos and figures along with expanded text. We were able to utilize in this current book more recent research that she has conducted as part of her activities as leader of a writing group called Life Stories at Cottage Grove Place, where she lives in Cedar Rapids. Additionally, we had access to a plethora of photos and slides, which she had compiled for her other books on each of the 4 family histories, along with source materials from the many PowerPoint presentations she has made for local and national groups interested in Norwegian immigration over the intervening 30 years since her earlier book.
The project started by retyping the entire book as a Word document on my laptop. Last fall, we started focusing on reviewing and updating the content. Just like Mom had done years ago, we were making up the process as we went. Zoom meetings, conference calls, Dropbox, and Google Docs were the perfect solution. We spent countless hours working through each chapter. When thinking about publishing the book, an obvious choice was Anundsen Publishing in Decorah, whom Mom and Dad had worked with before. Once we talked with Eric Anundsen, Mom's mind was made up. He had the empathy for our subject matter that Mom wanted. When it came to pictures and illustrations, we realized that we had very few original copies, and the ones we had were grainy and just didn't equal the digital imaging we have available to us now. When we approached Vesterheim's chief curator, Lorraine Gilbertson, to discuss this project and our need for some high quality photos, she was thrilled and opened our minds to a lot of wonderful archived digital illustrations. The collaboration was a perfect fit. One guiding principle was that Mom always had the final say. We could make suggestions, but she is the one with the vision for this book, and it needed to fit her research and her insight. We were so fortunate to learn so much from her along the way.
Before I talk a little bit about some of the images that we worked on, I just want to invite you, if you do have questions, you go ahead and write them in the chat. And at the end of this entire presentation, Dana Kelly can walk us through some of those questions that we can answer, and we're happy to. So the hunt for appropriate images was my favorite thing to do. Throughout the process, we kids really recognized how lucky we were to look at this and so many other resources through the same lens that Mom had used for many, many decades, and for which we had just assumed it was going to happen, and we took it for granted. In addition to the abundance of all that Mom had collected, and thanks to the internet, we were introduced to hundreds of digital photos, charts, prints, artwork, and more. We used many of our own photographs as well as those of family and friends who'd been on trips with us. Some illustrations from the oldest books referred to dates going back to the 1700s. And now, thanks to Google Books, some of those have been digitized and we could actually look at them, and they're in the public domain, so easily available for being used in a book.
The photo on the left is the cover of our book. That picture was taken in the 1880s in Vang i Valdres, Norway. You can see how the photo suggested the title for our book, Between Rocks and Hard Places. It's the very road that Dean's ancestors drove on to go to church. The photo on the right was taken at the very same spot in 1999 when the whole family was back there. Notice the curve in the road and also the waterfall in the background that give away its location. The road is now European Highway 16. Here we see a new map of the counties of Norway. Chapter 1 of the book begins with a description of Norway's history, government, topography, weather, and climate. The outline map shows the newly defined county boundaries, which were reorganized and renamed just 2 years ago on January 1st, 2020, when Norway reduced the number of the counties from 18 to 11. Now, all 8 of my grandparents came from Norway on sailing ships between 1852 and 1861, before the Civil War. However, in 1869, the youngest brother, as well as the parents of my great-grandma, Cotty Anderson, came to America on the maiden voyage of the Idaho, one of the earliest transatlantic steam plus sail ships carrying immigrants. Thus, the focus of my book is on conditions in Norway and among Norwegians while my ancestors lived in Norway, and about their immigrant experiences, which would vary from those who came like in 1900. In 1850, over 90% of Norway's population was rural, and it remained predominantly rural well into the last decades of the 19th century. The elite class accounted for only about 3% of the population, if that many. One historian said about the elite, they are not Norwegian at all, but of a mixed race, not even Scandinavian. But the rural people are as Norwegian as the very soil itself. Sometimes they were skilled at other trades, most were peasants. Now, Norwegian peasants were a very unique group of people, not to be confused with peasants of other countries. The reason for that is that Norway was never under the feudal system, as was most of the rest of Europe. Samuel Lang, an Englishman who lived in Norway for several years in the 1830s, before immigration was really going, he remarked about the independent nature of rural Norwegians and the equality of the people at that time, not only in material goods, but in manners and in character. Now, from the vantage point of a milk stool in our dairy barn, I often sat firmly holding the tail of the cow my mother was milking. She kept me on task by telling me tales while I kept her safe from the cow's switching tail. I was probably 4 or 5 years old because at age 6, I had my own cow to learn to milk, and I was assigned to that particular cow. Now I'll tell you a tale, no pun intended, from chapter 1, but that relates directly to Norway's history. When the Black Death swept through Norway in 1349, it was especially devastating in Hedalen and Valdres. Most of the people died or moved away. Farms were deserted and buildings tumbled down. Even the church was entirely swallowed up by the forest. One day in the 1500s, a hunter spotted a grouse perched in a low tree and took aim with his bow and arrow and shot at it. A strange clang was heard as if the arrow had struck metal. The hunter went over to see what it was, and under some big trees, he saw the little Hedal church. So he went over to the church to have a closer look. The door was partly open, and by the altar, a bear had made its winter lair. The man shot and killed the bear. He skinned it, And according to legend, the hide was attached to the wall of the church. I imagine he took the meat home to eat. The story always intrigued me, and I wondered if it was true. When my mother was a little girl, her uncle Anton claimed the story was true and had shown her a bit of the bear skin as well as a piece of wood from the Adolf Church brought to Wisconsin in 1857. And in the picture, you can see the little block of wood on the left and also the bear hide behind a frame on the lower right, or the lower right. And on the upper right, you see where the piece was cut out of this amazing portal of the beautiful church. Do you want to finish?
Yeah, you can see where the wood is missing. And this is just a part, that small piece of wood on the left is just a part of that square that was taken out of the portal. And immediately recognizing those relics, that it was a true story, that all of these things had been brought to America, and it gave credibility to the story from that point on.
That doorway of that church many times, totally blown away to think that at least 20 generations of my maternal forefathers walked through that very door. And Martha, I think we need the next slide. There it is. There's a picture of the church in Valdres. So if the legend is true, that means that the old bear waddled through the same doorway as my ancestors at baptisms, confirmations, weddings, funerals, and where they worshiped. So I wrote a letter to the curator of the church. I had to know for sure. And he informed me that the bear skin that was found in the Adolf Church has been there since 1558. So it was a true story. The Adolf Church, built in 1160, is a functioning congregation to this very day. At this beautifully carved baptismal font of the church, many of my ancestors were baptized, and it was also the home of many who immigrated in the middle of the 19th century. The next 3 chapters deal with the people, the farms, and the homes. It's said that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this photo proves the point. It's from in the 1880s, and the buildings appear to be made of unpainted boards, not logs in this case, and has stone foundations. Here we see multiple generations of various ages showing what they were wearing. Notice the shoes, the men's and the women's are of the same design. And the ladies' headgears show whether they're married or not. The ladies that are married are wearing caps, and the single girls are wearing braids. The old man and young boy were sporting felt hats, no doubt made at home. They probably didn't go to Vesterheim to have the felting done, being taught to make it. Numerous containers, such as a hand-woven basket, contains wool that was from the sheep on the farm. And it was being carded by the lady sitting on the steps, and it was being spun on the little spinning wheel on the left, made ready for the knitting and weaving. And the woman in the back, between the two that are working with wool, appears to have a tina that's probably full of fluff. Now, the population consisted of farm owners and freeholders, tenants, laborers, husband, as well as servants and paupers. The farms were small by American standards. At Urness in Sudden, the 1801 census showed 89 people living in 10 households on that farm. There were farms, many that were smaller, and some were larger. Now, the causes of immigration in the mid-1800s was mainly due to overpopulation during a time of economic hardship. Some left for religious reasons, but I don't think there were very many. Now, the vaccination was one of the things that was mandated for all children. And it proved that the vaccination was saving kids because more kids grew up. Also, the potato had been introduced in the late 1700s, and that increased the nutrition. So soon the limited 3% of tillable land that is available in Norway and was then could no longer support the population explosion, and immigration began. Farms in Norway were basically self-sufficient thanks to the raw materials and the skills they had as farmers, fishermen, hunters, and woodsmen. They also had special skills such as carpentry, metalwork, tanning, spinning, weaving, knitting, felting. And there were also tailors, shoemakers, and people with other skills on the farm. These skills made Norwegian immigrants tailor-made to develop the vast resources of agriculture in the United States. Children were put to work at a very early age. This boy is tending goats at a mountain farm or a setter in the 1880s. He probably received some of the clothes he's wearing in return for the work because they were not paid at this age. But it's interesting to note again, the photography of this picture, which is really excellent, but it was from the 1880s because photography was even then in its infancy. So photos earlier than about 1870 or 80 are scarce. Here we see a rural home. Rural homes were of similar design and had similar furnishings in the same arrangement as seen in this photo, taken on one of our trips to Norway many years ago. The interior shows a rectangular table with benches attached to the two outside walls. The short bench at the end was for the head of the house, and the cupboard in the corner was his cupboard. It's quite fancy, so this probably was a better than average farmhouse for a husman. Then to the far left, we see the edge of a cupboard, and that was under the supervision of the farmer's wife. And speaking of farmers' wives, their role was indeed unique. She had to be able to bear the children, manage the household, and do more farm work than was commonly expected of women on farms in other parts of Europe. If the husband was a husband who worked for the farm owner, his labor was required in the landowner's fields, and the wife tended the fields and flocks at home. She also did this if her husband was working in the forest, or if he went to sea for part of the year, or sometimes all year. Dairying was woman's work, leaving few jobs beyond her capability. Now, the original liberated woman was probably Norwegian. At one time, there were several hundred stop churches in Norway, and construction abruptly ceased with the Black Death in the middle of the 1300s. Less than 300 stop churches were still standing in 1650, 300 years after the Black Death. And it's said that it took about 300 years for Norway to rebuild its population and occupation after the Black Death. Today, only 28 stop churches remain, and one of them is at Urness in Sogn, and it's where my great-grandfather, Johannes Hansen Urness, was born and raised. His older brother was Ole and inherited the rights to the farm, so Johannes decided to emigrate. Daughter Martha now is going to tell you a little bit more about the Urness Church.
Here I am standing in the cemetery at Urness Church, which overlooks the Lusterfjord. The last time I was there, it was in 2018 with the members of our church choir from Grace Lutheran Church in River Forest, Illinois. I selfishly planned our trip so we could visit places that are so special to our family. We started out in Bergen, making our way through the fjords to Oslo. Not many tour groups go so deep into the fjords as we did. Visiting Urness and singing at Heidalen were special to every person on the trip, and definitely for Karen, her husband Kim, and me. It was so neat to be able to share our heritage with our church choir. Chapter 5 deals with religious rites in the Church of Norway, such as baptism, confirmations, and burial traditions. The church was also responsible for keeping records of smallpox vaccinations. Vaccinating was done by a qualified vaccinator, but the priest recorded the event. Again, perhaps because he's the only one with writing skills. In 1668, the first action requiring churches to keep records went into effect. They were not required by law until 1688. However, not many records date before 1700.
It took nearly 300 years or more from Norway to recover from the Black Death. In this picture, you see art from the late Viking Age between the 8th and 11th centuries, which has been known worldwide as the Urness style. To this very day, wood carving, metalwork, jewelry, and other art forms are produced in the Urness style. And being in Urness and having part of our family roots at that farm, we are particularly fond of the Urness style. On page 75 of the book, we take a look at the Urness style. Here at the top left of this photo is the wood carving on the north side of the Urness Stop Church, carved sometime in the 11th century. The one on the right is from the 21st century, 1,000 years later, and carved by Don Rorvik from Wisconsin. The carving features asymmetrical, graceful, intertwined lines, slender creatures with almond-shaped eyes, spirals to designate hip joints. The Urness design is also seen here in our personal jewelry, as well as in art in our homes. You see the Urness beast in the 50 øre coin down on the bottom of this slide. It's the 50 øre coin that was coined quite a few years ago in Norway. Now, chapter 8 covers transportation, travel, and communication, all vital to the beginning of immigration. And this particular illustration was from a very old book that I found, and it was before photography, so they used drawings to illustrate the story. Before photography, this was a means of showing transportation means in Norway before the days of photography. This shows traveling by boat, by horse-drawn carriages, or by pedestrians, the only means of travel at that time. And another thing that was really important was the marking of time. That's covered in chapter 9. A system of time reckoning was the primstav, or calendar stick. Many looked like a big wooden yardstick with little notches to mark the days and bigger notches to indicate weeks with symbols designating religious festival days. It also marked days for certain agricultural activities on the farm. On the one side was the summer side, but on the other side, shown on the left here in the slide, was the winter side. The winter side was October 14th to April 13th, and the summer side was April 14th to October 15th. Few people could read, but everyone could write, could see the pictures, and they knew the meanings of these symbols. It told the farmer when to plant crops, when to take his animals to the mountain pastures, when to harvest the grain and do other seasonal work. Now, tradition set 2 annual flyttedager, or moving days. April 14th was the spring moving day, and October 14th, the winter moving day. On these days, a servant's employment ended, and it could be extended for another 6 months, or they could move to another place of employment. Or after immigration began, they were free to emigrate in the spring. Now on this slide, you see the mitten at the top on the far left, if you look carefully. And these symbols date from the year 1646. And the other enlargements are from the summer side. And every one of these has a meaning. For example, the gridiron shown on the top is for St. Lawrence Wake. And St. Lawrence was said to have been roasted to death by his enemies. Also, it told him that the hay needed to be stored on the farm by this time. The chapter where this is described goes into detail of all of the calendar signs, and you'll enjoy reading that, I think. Here we see a graph or a chart of Norwegian immigration and the numbers that emigrated to the United States beginning in 1825 on the ship Restoration. Now, chapter 10 covers when they left, how they traveled, and what they needed on the trip. Also included in this volume of the book are 3 immigrant trips described in detail made by some of my ancestors, and it defines immigrant travel of the 1850s and 60s, not the 80s, 90s, and after steam, but before that time. Travel in Norway was difficult. With farms being so self-sufficient, there was little need to travel. But in 1647, the postal system began to develop, and paths were needed to deliver the mail, as well as for the government officials to fulfill their official duties, because this was about 300 years after the Black Death and things were picking up. Now here's another means of getting from point to point in the mountains. Sometimes a ladder and a rope was needed. This was true in trying to reach the Gesme farm in Orland, where Dean's paternal roots were.
In chapter 6, it's devoted to courting and marriage. Here we see an image we were able to access through Vesterheim, showing preparations for a wedding in Norway in 1857. It is a sketch or a drawing by the famous Norwegian artist Adolf Tiedemann that then was created after that into an actual oil painting. We chose this drawing over an image of the final painting because it was interesting, and when writing a book, copyright laws must be adhered to. And that means we sometimes must pay for legal permission for illustrating it in our book. Permission for Tiedemann's oil paintings is very cost prohibitive. So we were thrilled when Vesterheim allowed us to legally include this illustration that also demonstrated his wonderful ability to sketch something before he painted them. If you note throughout the book, under the captions under the pictures, you can see where they each came from and their special source. That's an interesting thing in and of itself. But back to Adolf Tiedemann. He was a Norwegian romantic nationalistic painter whose paintings date back from 1848 to 1874. Many were drawn or sketched before they were painted, and they beautifully portray the peasant lifestyle in Norway during the years of early immigration. His colorful images clearly picture the people, their activities, environment, and culture, including home interiors, clothing, furniture, and the landscapes of Norway. So if you want, just Google Adolf Tiedemann and you'll enjoy seeing some of his incredible paintings. And look at the pictures throughout this book, because all of these pictures, as Mom said, are worth 1,000 words each if you really stare at them for a while. Photos were not common until the 1870s and 80s, and so there's plenty of drawings and prints of various sorts that are in the book as well, because they came from before photography. And you can notice pictures of other varieties too, such as the chart you just saw, and other pictures, some of our personal collections, and some of our pictures from the trips we took to Norway.
While Adolf Tiedemann was busy painting, emigration from Norway was well underway. Every immigrant was required to have a passport when leaving the country. In chapter 10, you will see this photo of my great-grandma's passport issued by the chief of police in Bergen on April 18th, 1857. Details included on the document include that Martha was 23 years old, medium height, she had dark hair and blue eyes, and no birthmarks. Now, as we come to the end of our time together, we hope you've been inspired to know more about life in Norway in the 1800s through Norwegian emigration between rocks and hard places. Martha, are you on?
I'll take over for Butch here. We highly recommend our book for book clubs, Christmases, birthday gifts, and other occasions. Get your children and grandchildren excited about their Norwegian roots. Spark that same interest among your loved ones, like the stories our grandma told our mother, to keep her entertained in the barn during milking while holding the tail of a cow. To order your copies of our book, Norwegian Immigration Between Rocks and Hard Places, go to www.nagcnl.org and click on e-store. Feel free to write down the web address or take a snapshot of this picture and order it through NAGC. If you're in the Madison area and wish to make your purchase in person, you can go there directly and see their newly updated genealogy center at 415 West Main Street in Madison, Wisconsin. We're thankful to all NAGC and NL has done to further Norwegian immigration genealogy, Norwegian American genealogy research. The energy of Executive Director Dana Kelly is so genuine, and the staff is steeped in expertise.
Now, before we take some questions, I want to say tusen takk to all of you who have joined us today for this webinar, and mange tusen takk to Dana and all of her efforts to get this set up, and to the NAGC and NL for sponsoring the webinar. And I also want to apologize for my 93-year-old vocal cords that are neither as well trained nor perhaps as well preserved as my daughters and my sons. I also hope that you enjoyed your time with us today and hope you will enjoy the book, Norwegian Immigration Between Rocks and Hard Places. So now we'll stop sharing the presentation and I'll turn it over to Dana, who can pass along some questions if she received it.
Well, we got a lot of complimentary comments from you, definitely. A lot of fantastics and thank yous and wonderful. And one person mentioned that your book is an absolute must read before you go to Norway. They're planning on taking their grandchildren to Norway and said, you know, if you're going to take them, make them read this first. And I agree. When Karen came to our friends dinner last month, she said, if you can read at a 5th grade level, you can read this book. And I agree, but I agree in a good way. She doesn't mean that as, oh, it's childish or childlike. What she means is it's accessible and it's easy to read and you'll enjoy it as you go. It's not like slogging through a textbook. It is a pleasure read. And I agree 100% that it is a pleasurable read. And that's why I was so excited when it was updated. I was thrilled at the possibility of getting to read it again and it being back in print. So thank you so much for doing that and putting the book back in print so a new generation of readers can have access to it again. Another question we did get quite a bit was, are we recording? And yes, we are. And as long as I know how to download a Zoom recording, we should have that available to everybody who maybe missed it today, next week. So we will definitely send out a link to all of our members, and feel free to pass it along once we have that uploaded so everybody can, who wasn't able to join us today can enjoy it. Now, I had a question for Martha personally. How long did it take you to type that book when you had to go retype it?
Was it a couple months, just kind of here and there, but it took a long time, but it was really a labor of love, and kind of got me even more familiar with the book than I had been. So it went by faster than you'd imagine, but it did take a while.
And I'll say it was retyped and then we took it from there. And there's a lot of additional content that we brought in from Mom's past resources, a little bit that we added that wasn't in any resources that from Mom specifically, but just seemed to make a good point within the book. And the pictures, those are many of them are new to the book. So we think that it's an upgraded kind of version of it. And somebody asked if the cemetery, where is that cemetery? It's at the Vermont Lutheran Church, which is a couple miles away from Black Earth, Wisconsin. And we have cousins that live right by that on this Zoom right now. And somebody wondered if you knew the Mittelbust family in DeForest, Wisconsin, Mom.
Name and others. One of them lives there in Sierra.
A fun fact is if you go to Mount Horeb, on the one side of the street, the opposite side of the street that Open House Imports is in, look along the side there, and there is one building that has the Gesme name on it. Because an interesting fact is that the Gesme family came 2 years before the Urness family came to the exact same farm. They didn't necessarily meet, but one groups went on to Iowa, and a few of the Gesmes stayed on around in that area, but the Urnesses eventually took over that farm, and to this day, it's an Urness farm.
Somebody had a question here about the photos that you've been showing in your presentation. Are most of those in the book?
Oh yeah,
I didn't.
they're all in the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh no,
not any others.
Not the one of me at Urness. I don't think that's in there.
No. And some of those talking about process, showing Mom with her K-Pro and how she used to cut and paste her book. Those are just part of the process that was in it. But some of the pictures towards the content of the book, those are all in it.
That picture of you, Martha, in the cemetery, were you standing next to a special headstone, or was it just
No, just in general. I just happened to be over there and somebody caught my picture, so.
Yeah.
Something about headstones and monuments. In Norway, it was traditional, and perhaps still is, that after a certain period of time, the same grave space is used. And my great-great-grandfather they called him a quacksalver, quack doctor. And he would treat both animals and people. But it said that he examined the remains after a new grave was dug and it exposed the bones and the remains of the previous occupant of that space.
I will say that was my only disappointment when I visited Norway was when I got there the first time, there were no headstones to go see of my ancestors because it had been so long. I was very shocked by that custom when I was there the first time.
Well, very often those headstones that are removed, they're stacked up along the edge of the cemetery from many years back.
We want to just encourage you all to enjoy the book and to take advantage of the NAGC and NL Center. It's an incredible resource. Our mother did a lot there. Our father was on the board for a little while too. And it's fun to celebrate our ancestry and just the Norwegian culture in general. And that's something that they do so well there. And Dana, thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you. You've been so gracious to share your Saturday with us, and for coming to our dinner. To everybody remarked after our fundraiser, she didn't have to be so complimentary to us. And I said, well, it sure was nice that she was. And so we do appreciate that. Thank you very much. Um, Somebody commented here that they went to college in California with somebody whose name was Urness, and that they were well connected to, or that they were connected to a well-known church in Norway. And is this possibly a relative, even though his name has two S's? And
Well, over
I would
here,
say,
Ernest is spelled with two S's. In Norway, it's with one S, and in fact, in Ernest, it's OLNES. So there's various different.
RNES.
Sorry, Mom. What was that, Mom?
ORNES.
Oh, RNES, sorry. So it depends on if you're on one side of the fjord or the other. And then I don't know why they brought another S into it here in the US, but
Well, Ness is generally spelled with two S's in the English language.
okay.
But also Urness was not that common where I grew up. But there's even an Urness Township up in Minnesota. So it's not that rare a name. It's not as rare as the Gesme name, in fact, in the United States.
Somebody mentioned that their silver wedding crown wasn't as elaborate, and that one in the picture was clearly by Tiedemann, was clearly very elaborate. Here's a question for you. Does your Norwegian library collection encompass anything about oldest Norwegian organization established in the USA in 1860? This organization is Den Ritter Vita Kors.
Yeah, no, it does not. I have the Nordman America Ulvestad books, but that's about the oldest ones I have.
yes, lots and lots of thank
About
yous.
Telemark there. Back.
Sure.
Well, and I would say thank you from our family. This has been a fun project to work on for us. Because, it was after working on the book for so long, then it was published and it's like, okay, we don't have that project anymore. So this was kind of a fun next project for us to get involved in and do together. So thanks for giving us that opportunity and giving us a chance to talk about Mom's book.
Yeah,
We
well,
also highly recommend projects like this or some other nature with your own families. It really brought us together at a very difficult time, having lost Dad, and here in Cedar Rapids, it was the derecho and COVID. It really brought joy to us and meaning in a difficult time.
And you don't have to write as many books as Anne has done either to have make a meaningful impact on your family legacy for your descendants. Even just writing down 2 pages of memories is something priceless for your descendants. I absolutely believe that a partially written family history is better than none at all.
Yep.
So, and I preach that to everybody. A poorly written and partially written is better than nothing at all. So you don't have to be the wordsmith that this family is to leave something that's can be appreciated by your descendants for sure.
I might add that genealogy is a rather lonely occupation or preoccupation, because nobody really wants to hear all about your great-grandfather or great-grandmother. Particularly, it's only important to you and your family. So watch it when you start bragging about them.
Yeah.
But people really appreciate it down the line. So
yeah, eventually they'll love anything they can hear. And it's a lot of fun proving or disproving these things that you hear from oral history.
That reminds me of that beautiful baptismal font that was in the church. Does that date from the same time period of the church, or is that newer?
I would guess it was newer than when the church was new, but I don't know the year. I could find out because I think the president of the congregation is a distant relative.
it looks ancient when you're in the church, and So new is a relative word too.
It could be from the 1600s or after.
I've never seen such an elaborate baptismal font in my life. It's
I
amazing.
remember seeing some very early ones that were really big. It was like it was a baby bathtub. And that's virtually what they were, because they did immerse babies at one time.
And that's why they baptized more in the milder months, so that the baby wouldn't freeze.
Yes, the church records sometimes said a baby died from being brought to church too early for baptism. They were
Right.
supposed to be baptized within 8 days of birth, but that wasn't practical at all.
Yes, we just had somebody in doing research this week, and she said, oh my gosh, all of these babies were baptized, you know, within a week of birth, but this one was 6 months. And I said, well, look, that baby was born in October. It probably snowed the next day. And they said, never mind, we'll keep this one safe for a few months until we can get to town.
And often the father or some respected person in the community could baptize a baby and then have it renewed by the priest when he came to the community. Same with burial. They'd bury the corpse, but then the priest would conduct the service over the grave later.
Another thing that was really interesting in our process was when Mom would talk about people in our family, specific people dating way back. It wasn't for her. She said, no, these aren't just history to me. These are real people. I feel like I know them. I've learned so much about them, and hopefully the information in this book complements, all of that. So that really was a profound awakening to me, that, when Mom talks about so-and-so, she knows them in her heart.
Yeah. Yeah, I've come to feel that way about some of my ancestors too. The longer I try to dig for their records, the better I feel like I know them. We did have a question here. Somebody whose relatives, their first stop was Dane County. I'm assuming immigrants from Norway. And she's asking, can you summarize why Dane County was so important?
Well, I really don't know, but it all began pretty much in Muskego and Koshkonong. And there were some of those early ones that came to the East Coast, like on the Restoration. They came on into Illinois later, and I suppose it was just the availability of land and that it was available.
Well, you're talking to somebody who's sitting literally right now in the middle of Koshkonong, and so I'm completely surrounded by people who are descended from some of those earliest immigrants to Dane County. And it is interesting when you look at an ethnic map of Wisconsin. It's a German state, right? But not Dane County. Dane County is full of Norwegians. We got Madison in the middle, and then a nice ring of Norwegians right around the outside. And immigrants, they went where their friends were. They followed people who had come before them. So as soon as one person found Dane County, all of a sudden it was a destination for Norwegian immigration.
And usually they did not come all by themselves. My poor great grandmother, did not come all by herself. They came with someone they knew. Of course, Clayton Pearson and a few of those famous people came by themselves pretty much early on. But the average immigrant came with a friend or an acquaintance or a neighbor or someone in the group, family member.
Yeah, and they often, of course, like you said, the very first ones didn't know anybody. They weren't meeting anyone, but the later immigrants were often coming, to meet an aunt or an uncle or a cousin or an old neighbor. They often weren't just coming here just to see what would happen.
And arriving in Chicago in 1850 didn't mean that you'd have trouble with the traffic or anything.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to understand what the population was too, where they were coming to and coming from.
Mm-hmm.
That winds it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm just looking through the questions here. Yep, a lot of thank yous. So, I mean, thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing your day with us. And oh, somebody just commented, when am I leading a group to Norway? Well, as soon as they start letting Americans in. It's not a very easy place to get into right now.
You have
But
to quarantine for a few days first, so wait till you don't have to quarantine.
right, right. Yes, but thank you so much. It's been a wonderful opportunity and experience listening to you talk and learning so much about the process. And I loved seeing those old computers and thinking how much easier we have it now trying to put together a book like that.
Now, I just saw a question about if somebody knew Brian Rude. He's on the Vesterheim board with me. And there was another question about how to get a hold of the Gesme family. You could send an email to Norwegian Immigration at gmail.com. That's Norwegian Emigration, EM, not IMM.
Oops, I'll type that in the chat here.
Okay.
Norwegian Immigration at
Immigration
Gmail.
at gmail.com. That'll come to Karen and me.
And we saw so many people here that we know your name, or we know of you, or we know you very, very well. And just great to see everybody here. What a wonderful thing this has been for us, a goal, great
Yeah.
goal.
Thank you. Tusen takk, alle sammen.
Mange tusen takk.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And we will, as soon as I get the recording edited down, we will have that available for anyone whose family or friends may have missed this morning, and get that distributed to our email list. And you can feel free to share that far and wide. We'd love to share this with everyone who might be interested in what the Gesmes have been up to for the past year. So thank you so much. And we will see everyone at one of these soon.
Bye, everybody. Tusen takk.
Thank you very much. Thank you.